going live, and we're connecting with all of the University of Minnesota campuses as well as online. And so during the live stream, they will be able to hear us talking in this room. So when we have presenters, it's nice to be able to listen, think about how what they're saying reflects with yourself. And during the event, you can share your ideas on slido.com. And so now we will begin the presentations and be going on to the live stream. All set? Okay. Welcome everyone, both here in person on the Twin Cities campus and across the University of Minnesota campuses and the United States and globally. I am Pierre Levin. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Graduate Research Assistant for the Educators Program at the Institute on the Environment, also known as INE. I'd like to mention that the entire event is being live captioned. If you are on the other campuses, you can press the closed caption button, and it should pop up and work for you. Today we're here for the third annual Sustainability Education Summit. The goal of this summit is to bring together students and educators to share resources for teaching sustainability. It is evident that simply from where you all are and work, that sustainability doesn't happen in just one place or one discipline. To make this event accessible, interactive, and not burn too much carbon, we are testing out creative ways to make presentations and foster engagement electronically. The entire program is live streamed on slido.com. You can go to Slido and put in the event code #SUST to participate. There you'll be able to participate in polls and submit questions during the panels. Since we're hosting the summit on Slido and it's new, we're going to try it out. So if you're in person, open Slido on your phone browser. If you're at home, you can exit the full screen to see the question. And we'll start off with learning if you prefer dogs, cats, rabbits, or none of them are your taste. It looks like we have a lot of dog lovers joining us today. So during the event, we'll have a couple moments when you see polls come up that reflect upon the presentations that you see, and we have two panels that you can submit questions for the panelists. And the questions are submitted, you can simply upvote to have your question or someone else's highlighted and discussed at the event. So in designing this year's summit, the INE educators, which is a cohort of University of Minnesota faculty, instructors, and librarians, hope to interweave their stories on teaching sustainability to highlight commonalities. They know, as we all do, that sustainability is not a story of individual action. It's a collective tale of making social change. We hope to inspire a conversation on the collective stories of teaching sustainability and distribute resources to you all today. The featured presenters work in fields of veterinary medicine, environmental education, sustainability studies, international development, campus sustainability, media libraries, and equity and diversity. But you all are also active participants today. So think and share on what this work means in your field. You can find a full schedule, information about the presenters, and resources for teaching sustainability on our website, which is z.umn.edu/summit. You might be able to see it right here. And today we will begin with an opening and land acknowledgement from the Institute on the Environment Director, Jessica Hellman. Then we'll move into a section about how we come to sustainability and where it happens, before jumping into tools shared by our presenters. We'll have a 10-minute break at 10:30 a.m. Central United States time. And before introducing Jessica, a couple housekeeping items for the Twin Cities event. The restrooms and water are down the hall. A gender-neutral bathroom can be found in McGraw Library, which is attached to here on the west end. If you've not signed in at the registration table, please do so at the break. And feel free to get up during the program as you need to. There are some teaching resources on environmental education and environmental justice in the back of the room. There's also a place there to share ones that you like. Those are also posted online, where you can also share on the Slido and see them there. Now, to get started, Jessica Hellman is the director of INE as well as a professor in the Department of Ecology, Evolution, and Behavior in the College of Biological Science here at the University of Minnesota. Her research focuses on global global climate ecology, climate adaptation, and the reduction of greenhouse gases. Let's welcome Jessica and begin.
Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone out in the World Wide Web. I'm Jessica, she, hers, and I'm the director of the Institute here, Institute on the Environment at the University of Minnesota. Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you, Peter, also and Beth and Mary and many others who have done extraordinary work to put this on. Listening to him rattle through all the different technology that's being used is really an extraordinary effort, and I know much appreciated by participants all across the University of Minnesota and around the country and around the world. So I would like to open our summit by recognizing that lots of us are gathered today with different points of view and different perspectives on sustainability and on society, but we are united here in a culture of inclusivity, and that culture makes us strong and it makes us smart. I also want to acknowledge, at least, and this is somewhat specific to those of us here on the Twin Cities campus, that this, where we sit today, this part of the University of Minnesota is built on the traditional lands of the Dakota people. The university was granted this land, but it was granted through coerced treaties that were later not honored or fulfilled. And it's really important that we speak of that history and that we recognize that those treaties are living documents and living obligations. And I know that all of the campuses of the University of Minnesota have their own history of colonization, as do other campuses across this country. So why do we speak of this history? Why do we take a moment to acknowledge that? Because educating ourselves can help improve and strengthen relations with tribal nations. Education can help us respect tribal sovereignty and hopefully help reconcile a harmful past. So I invite you, wherever you may live, to learn about whose land you inhabit and to take steps to acknowledge and build a respectful relationship with Indigenous people. So this is something that the Institute on the Environment is working to do. It's a journey of education and self and institutional improvement, and it's a journey that we are still pursuing. It's ongoing. Over the last year, we've collaborated with Indigenous academic leaders. We've supported projects, both large and small, that conceive of collaboration with Indigenous communities in new ways. And this spring, we're conducting a book club on The Relentless Business of Treaties by Martin Case. This is not my copy. My copy has already seen better days. I'm on page 60, and it has many dog-eared pages. So I'm definitely learning and enjoying reading. I'm looking forward to meeting with my book group. If you would like to be part of our book club, you are very welcome to do so. It's not too late to join, and there's information about it on the Summit website. So at the Institute on the Environment, these things are only the beginning. They're just a start of a journey, and we'd love for you to join us on that journey. So what is the Institute on the Environment? We are a community of, we say, sustainability dreamers and doers. And I know you are too. We live at the intersection of disciplines and different ways of thinking. We exist to help build a future where people and planet prosper together. We do that through interdisciplinary research, through sustainability education and leadership development, and through storytelling at scale. And we do that for the entire University of Minnesota, here on the Twin Cities, in Duluth, Crookston, Rochester, and Morris, our colleagues across the entire university. We focus, at the moment, we focus our work on helping to achieve tangible goals. We say in Minnesota for the world. We work towards sustainability globally, but we are focused on our laboratory here at home. Right now, the Institute goals are clean drinking water for all Minnesotans, building a carbon neutral economy in Minnesota, and discovering a sustainable land use in our home state. As you're going to see today and experience, sustainability education flourishes here at the University of Minnesota, Why is that? Because of the hard work that goes on in classrooms and communities every day by committed faculty and instructors and committed students across many disciplines on all of our campuses. One way, as Peter already mentioned, that the Institute on the Environment supports curricular innovation and sustainability is through our INE Educators Program. You're going to hear from current educators today, and if this is a program that sounds like it might be of interest to you, it's a 15-month cohort sort of fellowship experience with support to help advance your own teaching of sustainability across the disciplines. And a call for nominations for the next cohort will come out very soon, just in the next month or so. And Peter knows all about it. You can be in touch with him to learn more about this opportunity for University of Minnesota faculty and staff across all campuses. So thank you for being here today. I hope that you learn from today. I hope you share your experiences today. And most importantly, I know today will enable us all to be inspired and renewed by the extraordinary work that's going on across this university. And that is crucially important because that sustainable future needs each and every one of us. So thank you very much.
Without further ado, we will get going. If you feel like promoting our cause on social media, you can tweet at #SustSummit and on Instagram at UMNSustEd. So we'll start the live presentations now. And there'll be about a 20-second delay, we shall be aware of, as we're here, because we're going through a lot of technical advances. But enjoy the show.
Hi, I'm Tom Beery. I'm an environmental educator, and my research is focused on environmental and social science. Basically, I'm interested and work in the realm of the human side of environmental problem solving. And I currently teach and research at the University of Kristianstad in Kristianstad, Sweden. I've worked quite a bit at the University of Minnesota, and I'm a member of the Institute on the Environment education team.
My background is in water resource management and watershed science. Working along the north shore of Lake Superior for 7 years before I came to UMD was a great training and background in sustainability.
Welcome. My name is Scott Spicer, and I serve as Media Outreach and Learning Spaces Librarian with the University of Minnesota Libraries, Twin Cities campus. In this role, I function as Head of Library Media Services, a program primarily geared towards supporting course-integrated student-produced media assignments and commercial media resources, such as documentary, independent, and practitioner films.
Hi, my name is Beth Mercer-Taylor, and I'm Sustainability Education Coordinator at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. And I work at the Institute on the Environment, which is a interdisciplinary, all-campus, all-college program of the University of Minnesota, a center for all things environmental and sustainability.
I'm Clement Liu. I'm an assistant professor of environmental studies and the student success coordinator in equity, diversity, and intercultural programs at the University of Minnesota Morris.
Hi, my name's Dominic Travis, and this is Maya Sharkar. We're here to discuss a course in the Grand Challenge curriculum at the University of Minnesota called Ecosystem Health, Leadership at the Intersection of Humans, Animals, and the Environment. So I am the faculty coordinator of the course. I am a public health veterinarian working in the ecology of health at the College of Veterinary Medicine. I also have appointments in the School of Public Health and Environmental Health, and I'm a fellow at the Institute of Environment.
Well, I'm a student of ecology, and with that I study and work with a lot of natural systems that are facing a plethora of environmental stresses, many of which are coming from anthropogenic sources.
I currently direct the Masters of Development Practice program at the Humphrey School, and we focus principally on sustainable development questions globally and locally, and looking at how these different disciplines and different skill sets and issues that affect our world interact in a holistic way, and how we can affect change in those systems. You know, I never set out to teach sustainability.
Because I actually didn't really know very much about sustainability education. There's so many people who were like I was, not really thinking they are the ones who could make a difference or who could contribute or who should even learn more about sustainability.
You know, initially I was just interested in this idea of like things being like, you know, things in nature working in, or things in nature having some like oughtness, or how they ought to work in a certain way. Then reading more about it made me actually concerned that, right, so many things were not working the way that they ought to work because of human interventions. And then right, so started being more interested and concerned about that. And then when I was reading about that, I started reading about environmental justice. And that's actually the hook that caught me. I think it was environmental justice, and that a lot of environmental harms also sort of reinforced social harms and the kind of historical harms. Made me think right, that it was really something important that needed addressing. And then that I started working more and more on that. Now I seem to work on that all the time.
Sustainability work is important to me. I spent a summer in the Arctic Circle in graduate school on Ellesmere Island, and the research around climate change, it just stuck with me. And being in that special area of Earth that's changing really rapidly, it just never really went away. When you think about sustainability and watershed management and the trout streams along the north shore of Lake Superior, I thought everything we do to balance land use and human activity might not be enough. Climate change could still wipe out these resources. So that lesson really stuck with me, and it's motivated me to work in sustainability, reducing carbon, and educating future generations to make sure climate change is part of their decision making.
Beyond my job responsibilities to support student media projects, I believe strongly that issues related to sustainability, especially but not limited to climate change, are already becoming defining events for my generation and certainly older. Further, that these challenges will be even more acute for future generations, so getting students deeply engaged with these topics in their education will hopefully spark interest to connect this challenge to their experience and perhaps think critically on solutions to these wicked challenges. Having been a part of so many sustainability student media projects, I feel a responsibility to share out what I've learned with other sustainability educators. Accordingly, my Institute on the Environment Educators Research Project was to create a media resource designed to inspire and inform K-12 higher ed and other sustainability educators on some potential directions for integrating student media assignments into their instruction. On a more personal note, I have a 3.5-year-old, and again, I'm concerned that multiple issues related to sustainability will be central challenges for him and his generation throughout their lives. For many, including myself, sustainability issues can feel a bit existential and maybe disempowering. So providing this resource and maybe being able to come up with some solutions is also a form of empowerment, and it's my tiny way of maybe contributing to some potential future solutions.
I got into the work because I met a fisheries scientist who's also a neighbor in the community of Falcon Heights where I live, Ann Kapuscinski. And she's been involved with the Union of Concerned Scientists and had a real passion to address climate change. She explained to me that fisheries were kind of on the front lines of being affected by climate change, as well as people who make their livelihoods from fishing. I think her passion was contagious, so when I met her and got to understand just the opportunity to make a difference in these issues and the importance of them in a cross-cutting way, it really changed my outlook and direction for my career. So that was in 2008, and I've been working in sustainability basically since few months after I met Anne when she convinced me to come and work for the precursor to the Institute on the Environment, which was a small institute that she started.
If you want to be interested in the environment, in the economy, and if you want to be interested in social processes and people, culture, traditions, there's really no other space where you can work, where you can bring all of those interests to bear on challenges and issues that you're concerned about or that the people that you work with are concerned about. Sustainability for me is the only type of work you can do that has a holistic enough lens to think about all the things that matter and all the things that really make a difference in terms of what we're trying to accomplish in the world and what keeps us or accelerates us along the pathway.
Now, when you first begin to think of ways to restore, protect, and promote resilience of these natural systems, many people tend to focus on the environmental dimension in absence of human influence, which is something that I did at first. However, when I tried to study the solutions to these environmental challenges, I began to see that environmental health, animal health, and human health are all heavily interconnected. In the end, environmental well-being and human well-being cannot be separated, which is why I'm interested in sustainability and took the ecosystem health course.
So that's a much better description than I can do. Our group does a lot of research at the interface, especially with wildlife. We look at infectious disease emergence and the ecology of infectious diseases. We look at the effects of extractive industries on the entire ecosystem and the health of humans and animals. And of course, we look at such factors as climate change and food and water security and things as well.
For me, I don't teach in a classroom, so it's almost like our entire campus is a classroom. And I like to take what students learn in the classroom, their faculty taught classes, and extend that outside the classroom into applied learning. I partner with faculty and students on problems that I guess use their technical skills, but also develop their professional skills as well. Action that students take is really a driver for change on campus. And the more they're educated, the more experience they get, the more confident they get in asking for things like a campus temperature policy or a pollinator pledge. And the campus has to respond.
It's my pleasure to support faculty who are part of our Institute on the Environment, or INE Educators program, who have sustainability ideas to implement into their teaching and their community engagement in colleges and universities. And we work with faculty from across our 5-campus system at the University of Minnesota. So it's been really wonderful experience for me to get to know the context of all 5 of our campuses at Twin Cities and Duluth and Crookston and Morris and Rochester. And they're really different, and they are strong and have sustainability strengths that actually match really well together when you add up all of the different kinds of opportunities, from small rural campuses to a giant Research One university to a regional university with special focuses in natural resources and issues around large lakes, that's at Duluth, to a leading sustainability campus that's recognized all over the country for powering the campus with renewable sources of energy and also teaching leadership and sustainability, and that's the University of Minnesota at Morris. That's something not everyone understands about sustainability at Minnesota, is how system-wide it's been, and I've been in my job for 10 years, and it's really had that system focus, really sharing lots of different ways of understanding sustainability, working together, students, faculty, staff levels. It's been that way for 10 years, and I think that's something unique and something that really could be shared with other campus communities in other parts of North America and maybe the world.
Since the community and the university that I work at are located within what's called the Kristianstad Vattenrike Biosphere Reserve, Kristianstad being the name of the city, Vattenrike translates directly as Water Kingdom, and it is a biosphere reserve, this area. Now, a biosphere reserve is a United Nations designation. All right, there are biosphere reserves, 700 some, all over the world. All right, and they're designated as learning sites for sustainable development. So I get out into the Vattenrike, I get out to these places with my students. For example, this past fall, my students and I conducted a bike tour through the community. We spent a whole day biking around. And the goal was to consider what impacts the current climate projections for this area have on this community. Kristianstad is one of these places in Sweden that is very low and along the coast. All right. So one of the real threats in this region is sea level rise. And so that was an example of one of the sites we visited. We really wanted to have a physical experience of what sea level rise might look like here in Kristianstad. And what that allows us to do is not just consider sea level rise as a faraway phenomena or as a quantitative phenomena, how much the sea level is going to rise, when that rise is projected, that sort of thing. But it also made it a human phenomena. We were able to see these places where people live and work, and bike through these places in a very real and tangible way. So making climate change visible. I want to share a key tool in my current sustainability work. And not only is this a key tool for me, it's a key tool for my university, and it's a key tool really across Swedish society in general. And perhaps it's already a key tool for you as well. But what I'm referring to as the tool is the Sustainable Development Goals of Agenda 2030, the United Nations Initiative on Sustainability. All right, and what these goals do is they provide a blueprint for a better and more sustainable future. All right, and they address the global challenges that we face in a very broad way. Okay, so including challenges related to poverty, challenges related to inequality, challenges related to climate change, environmental degradation, peace, and justice. So we know that sustainability is a very broad idea, and the Sustainable Development Goals of Agenda 2030 capture that breadth. All right? And while there are these distinct goals, they're interconnected. They intertwine with one another. And that becomes clear when one digs into these goals a little bit deeper. Now, each of these goals comes with a set of targets and indicators. And that's important because these ideas sound good or look good, but more information is needed. What exactly does clean water and sanitation mean from a sustainability standpoint? Or what does gender equality mean? All right, so we turn to the targets and indicators to help us with that. The targets provide more detail, and the indicators provide a way in which we can measure progress. Let me give you an example of the targets for Sustainable Development Goal 13, climate action. All right? So target 1, strengthen resilience and adaptive capacity to climate-related hazards and national disasters in all countries. Target number 2, integrate climate change measures into national policies, strategies, and planning. And target number 3, improve education, awareness raising, human and institutional capacity on climate change, mitigation, adaptation, impact reduction, and early warning. So, while these are still quite broad, they do show how climate action is narrowed and focused. And the more you dig into the Sustainable Development Goals, the more and more specific we can get in how we address these ideas. So for this reason, I find this a terrific tool. Not only does it provide guidance on sustainability, but it provides a common language so that we can talk about sustainability in Minnesota and Sweden back and forth using a common language that may be quite useful and quite applicable in both settings. All right. What I want to do is give you a specific example of how this framework, these goals, are being used at the University of Kristianstad. So you can see perhaps the usefulness that I'm experiencing. All right, so one specific way in which the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are being used is that teams of faculty from all across the university are getting together and really considering how these 17 goals fit within the curriculum of their specific program. All right. So, for example, there is a group I'm working with in the Educational Sciences Department, and the idea is, let's look at the curriculum of educational sciences and see where the 17 goals currently fit, where they're explicitly addressed, where they're missing, where they may not belong. Really look at the curriculum using the 17 goals as a guideline, with the ultimate goal of identifying, are there gaps, are there places in which the 17 goals could get brought in and be made visible within the curriculum. Because at the sort of the core of this effort is that the university has a responsibility to prepare students to be thinking about sustainability in their professional context. So future educators here at the University of Kristianstad need to be thinking about how sustainability fits into their role as an educator. And therefore, a careful analysis of the curriculum and how these goals can come to life in the curriculum, or at least be made visible in the curriculum, is deemed as an important way to help students then think about how these ideas are going to be critical or important to them as they move forward in their professional life. And just as I've used the idea of making sustainability visible. All right, and so I just have to point this out in this picture. So here in the foyer to the library, you can see these boxes, all right, behind the glass. And those boxes are actually, there's one box for each of the goals. And they were on display in the foyer there for quite some time this past fall. Again, the idea is let's put these big colorful boxes up so that people are talking about the goals and they're thinking about the goals, and we're making this focus on sustainable development goals visible. All right. So if that's happening in very casual ways, like as something one sees while entering the library, but it's also happening in very meaningful ways in terms of how curriculum is being designed and how that's being translated into coursework, then indeed the university is being able to use this framework to move sustainability forward at the university here. So one of the challenges that I come across, or that we come across here at the University of Kristianstad, is even though we think that the Sustainable Development Goals framework, the 17 SDGs of Agenda 2030, even though we think that provides excellent guidance and indeed a framework so that folks can figure out how their sustainability efforts fit with this broader overall global sustainability mission. Even so, it still sometimes feels too broad. So like Sustainable Development Goal number 1, no poverty. Well, the goal, no poverty, is enormously broad. All right. And so it really does, at first glance, the challenge is that we still don't have a tool to guide us that provides enough direction. But really, when one sort of digs in a little and you look at the targets, so the next layer of the framework, I think that provides that extra guidance that's needed, and really addresses that concern that the tool is too broad. So I would say, in general, a challenge of working in sustainability is that it is such a broad, all-encompassing idea. So getting it down to specific action steps, that can be a challenge.
I'm going to talk a little bit about my own approach and thinking about teaching sustainability. I really do believe that sustainability should be an aspect of every discipline, every way of knowing on a college campus. And because sustainability is really the integration of human and natural systems, including our economic systems and our social and cultural systems as humans, and how we interrelate in so many varied ways with the world all around us, underneath us, above us. I think that's as core as any of the liberal arts, any of the sciences, to becoming an educated person who's able to contribute to the world today. So I see it as part of everything. I really like using simulations and case studies and other kind of ways to have students have an experience of actually practicing doing something around sustainability. So I've used a project called the World Climate Simulation to let students have a chance to actually play the roles of countries, regions around the world, and actually negotiate as they do every year, as countries do every year at the Conference of the Parties. Students play the roles of countries and they negotiate to a greenhouse gas emissions global agreement, or they don't. Things unfold as they will unfold in the classroom, and I think that's a really powerful learning experience. I also think that environmental justice or social justice, issues of equity are core fundamental in sustainability. You can't break them away from sustainability in the way that I see things, because if you don't attend to equity, then the work of sustainability risks actually worsening inequalities and inequities in the world that are already worsening, at least in North America now. So I think that's an important lens that I bring and want to share with faculty to think about bringing into their teaching and work. And I think that interest and understanding that matters is growing. A book I really like is The Colors of Nature. This is published by Milkweed Press. The author, the editor is Alison Deming, who's written other environmental and sustainability-related books. And this is a collection of writings about nature from different perspectives, different cultural perspectives, different socioeconomic backgrounds of the writers. And it's kind of not your usual technocratic kind of UN speak approach to issues of sustainability and environment. And I think it maybe broadens, opens up some other ways of understanding the important issues. And there are many other great books too. A lot of our faculty have, I think, really enjoyed Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. So I think the classroom is a great place to feature and amplify the voices of writers and thinkers that might not be actually at the front of the classroom. So that's something that I care about and try to push forward in sustainability.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about the discipline of ecosystem health and how it connects to sustainability and why we're engaged in building this program. Health is our most basic human right and therefore one of the most important indicators of sustainable development. At the same time, the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity is imperative for the continued functioning of ecosystems at all scales and for the delivery of ecosystem services that are essential for human health. Freedom from disease, mental health and well-being, genetic health and diversity, population conservation, nutritional security, and the use of medicinal and other ecosystem services that support health are all part of the sustainability discussion. Thus, we came to the concept of sustainability through that lens. The connection and interdependence between humans, animal, and environmental health is recognized by and included in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This interconnectedness represents a level of complexity that most traditional disciplines or approaches do not inherently tackle, but are broken into pieces and farmed out to individual disciplinary experts in human, animal, and environmental health. There is general recognition that this siloed way of helping is not working, and the global health community has recently been searching for new methods and approaches to tackle this complexity more holistically. Terms like One Health, conservation medicine, planetary health, environmental public health, and ecosystem health are all synonymous with these ideas. To address these issues, the UMN College of Veterinary Medicine is invested in building capacity in this discipline, or the practice of ecosystem health. This discipline emerged in the early 1990s as a response to the growing pressure that humans are placing ever-increasing pressure on global steady states that support health, ecosystem services for health. It posits that health is improved by changing the way people interact with their environment based upon research findings. The definition we like to use is ecosystem health recognizes the inherent interdependence of the health of humans, animals, and ecosystems, and explores the perspectives, theories, and methodologies emerging at the interface between ecological, social, and health sciences. The core principal philosophical tenets of ecosystem health include systems thinking, transdisciplinary research, participation, sustainability, gender and social equity, and a knowledge to action-based approach. It includes systems-based approaches to identify and validate shared indicators or diagnostic measurement type tests, if you will, that help monitor steady states and measure the impact of human choices and values, as well as propose treatments for the problem. The goal is to create win-win solutions that are measurable and monitorable among multiple stakeholders and values. This is a relatively new disciplinary paradigm, thus the community of practitioners is relatively small. We are engaging in the development of a training program in ecosystem health under the assumption that this is a useful method for actualizing the UN Sustainable Development Goals at multiple scales. In this way, we believe we can develop new professionals aimed at tackling the necessary complexity of these problems, competent and team-based skills working with diverse communities on culturally appropriate solutions.
One of my first experiences working on and learning about sustainability was taking the Grand Challenge course in ecosystem health, where we were placed on teams tasked with developing a solution to a case study using ecosystem health principles and methods. My team and I decided to tackle unsustainable diets, specifically looking at how we could decrease red meat consumption by utilizing a more sustainable protein source. In other words, we found that we could decrease red meat in and increase the healthiness of American diets by increasing cricket protein consumption, as cricket protein has a better overall nutrition profile and takes significantly fewer resources to produce. So, using ecosystem health principles and methods, such as design thinking and systems mapping, we broke the case down into three components of science, policy, and public communication. Now, eating insects is not a new idea, but we found that there was an issue in the appeal of cricket protein in the US market. So our project on unsustainable diets needed to focus on public communication, as the heart of the solution to increasing cricket protein consumption was better marketing of cricket products and increasing acceptability of eating cricket protein. So in the end, my team developed a pilot program to increase cricket production and to measure the hopefully increased acceptability of cricket protein in diets in the Minneapolis area as an optimal solution to local unsustainable diets. And in the end, we even brought some promotional cricket snacks to our final presentation. Yeah, so my thoughts on the course, honestly, it was a lot in multiple ways. It was my first introduction to these complex, messy grand challenges, and we were kind of tasked and intaking a lot of different information from different fields, which, was a point of the course, but was a little bit difficult week by week, learning social sciences and then physical sciences and then complexity science. So it was a lot of information to intake. And then we had to apply all of this new understanding into a case study with similarly experienced students, which ended up really turning out a great solution in the end. But I know we had quite the process and developing multiple solutions and figuring out just real world experiences that they wouldn't work. I know one of our solutions was trying to teach red meat education and its unsustainability, and we were turned down by multiple grocery outlets just flat out over email, which was good real world experience. However, it was kind of like a pressure cooker when you're in that semester-based, class-based setting.
So did you guys, how did the team work?
The team worked actually rather well. I liked that the grad student became the leader up front because that settled any dispute of lack of participation or over participation, and honestly had a really great team. So
some teams have to go into mediation
yeah.
to kind of work through their process a little bit. And that's part of the experience and it's part of the real world. We try and make them understand that's part of the real world, but it doesn't always work. So.
Right,
Okay,
right.
cool. Thank you.
My approach to teaching sustainability is in the support I provide instructors in deploying both the use of student-produced media projects and commercial media resources such as documentaries to help learners more deeply engage with the complex and nuanced topics related to sustainability. With media creation in particular, this typically means a more learner-centered, constructivist, multimodal communications model that tends to be more group and project-based. To best illustrate this potential and inspire other sustainability educators, I've developed the Student-Produced Sustainability Project Gallery for my Institute on the Environment Educators Research Project. Ultimately, my goals for this project are to inspire instructors to widen their lens through the consideration of the use of a student media project, to motivate students to care more deeply about topics related to sustainability by connecting these issues to their own experiences, and hopefully through this process inspire current and future generations to maybe develop effective solutions and act in order to mitigate some of the effects related to sustainability challenges. Media assignments by their very nature can be inherently messy. We cannot assume that instructors nor students have a lot of experience with media creation and instruction nor the production process. Therefore, it is critical to articulate the specific purpose or learning objectives for a given student media assignment balanced with other pedagogical and curricular expectations. If the objectives are not well articulated, then the assignment and scaffolding may also be out of alignment, leaving students frustrated and making assessment of the final product a challenge. As such, though I put a lot of time into working with instructors and other support professionals, sometimes the projects do not turn out exactly as expected. For this reason, we often start with a lower barrier type of media project and continue to refine and tweak the assignments in subsequent semesters to maximize its potential. In addition to assignment design challenges, we sometimes also come across unexpected technical difficulties during the media production process where files may get lost or sound-visual issues arise that can be a challenge to fix. Fortunately, this seems to be a lot less of an issue today than it was several years ago, and we're often able to find a workaround.
We wear clothes to protect ourselves from the environment, to follow a dress code, to assimilate, to signify profession and class, to rebel, and to express our identity and culture. Clearly, clothing plays a central role in our society, but how much are you willing to spend on a shirt?
$15?
I don't know, like $10.
No more than $15. Oh, $5.
Like $10.
$7 max.
One of the biggest problems in my mind with fast fashion is that consumers have been trained that clothing has essentially very little value. And that's because in what we call a race to the bottom, retailers and brands have cut their margins super thin in order to get clothing to us faster and cheaper with really quick turnarounds with new styles. Like brands make cheaper clothes and consumers want cheaper clothes, and we're all part of the problem, myself included.
Fast fashion is the approach of quickly designing, creating, and marketing low-cost clothing. It's a common practice for many brands worldwide, including Zara, Forever 21, Gap, H&M, Fashion Nova, Old Navy, just to name a few.
These retailers' economic success relies on efficient supply chains that are able to transform raw material into final products that will be globally distributed.
So there's a lot of negative ramifications on the supply chain because these cost-cutting measures have put a lot of pressure on suppliers to cut labor standards and also on the environmental practices that they're using to create these clothes.
These labor effects include child labor, unfair wages in clothing factories, and unsafe working conditions. Environmental effects arise because fast fashion is the second most polluting industry in the world, releasing greenhouse gases, untreated chemical waste, and microplastics. Bodies of water that community members and wildlife alike rely on become contaminated due to waste in the runoff. Due to the low quality and the short lifespan of these clothes, they are likely to end up in landfills.
One of the other big things that is a challenge is coming back to that idea that brands can't really do this by themselves. So it will require collaboration across the industry, along with government and NGOs, in order to put these standards in place and to make significant change.
This grand challenge involves complex systems in different sectors with a diverse group of stakeholders. The big picture can be quite overwhelming. In order to narrow our scope, we are focusing on key stakeholders with the highest interest and power to generate change. Manufacturer-owned retailers, governments, non-governmental organizations, and social media influencers who can easily connect to consumers.
One of the biggest problems with the supply chain and it being global is that that's a problem that's hidden from most consumers. So the average consumer of clothing has no idea about the impacts that their clothing has. And so that's made it easier for brands to hide that impact. And so one of the biggest things that we can do to get started on this conversation is to increase the transparency in our supply chains as brands, or to put pressure on them from outside sources like the government to have to disclose some of these practices.
To fight the lack of transparency in the supply chain, we are proposing an electronic label that rates the sustainable and ethical practices of a retailer on a scale from 1 to 5. This rating will be based on 4 measurements. 1, the amount of recycled material that re-enters the supply chain. 2, wages of factory workers. 3, amount of annual income that companies are giving back for social development. And 4, the presence or absence of transparency in their supply chains. Non-governmental organizations will collect this data from the retailers, the workers, and community leaders.
This label will be communicated to consumers with the help of social media influencers. They will be incentivized with an income tax deduction to include this label during their advertisements. Consumers have the right to not only know what is in their clothes, but also how they are produced in order to make informed decisions. Additionally, the government will implement a tax penalty on retailers that is proportional to the rating they receive. This revenue will be used to fund current bioremediation methods and support the development of innovative technologies that will remediate and restore impacted ecosystems.
Even though these problems are enormous, I don't think that they're without hope. We just have to be approaching them from multiple angles. So from the top down, the industry needs to be making changes that are changing the way that our clothes are made. Governments need to be increasing regulation, potentially, if needed, to enforce that to happen. And then also we need to be making changes from the bottom up as consumers in how we produce and consume clothes.
Our solution empowers consumers to make purchasing decisions based on a rating and encourages retailers to change their practices. The next time you go shopping, stop to think about where that item of clothing came from, how it was produced, and how you can make an impact. Remember, we are all part of the solution.
Okay, now we're going to move on to a poll. I'm sorry, not a poll, to a panel. And moderating is Mary Hahnemann, and we have 3 educators who she'll introduce.
Wow, the lights come up in the room.
Good morning, everyone. Those here in the room in St. Paul, as well as those around the world listening in. As Pete mentioned, my name is Mary Hahnemann, and I co-lead the sustainability education efforts here with Beth Mercer-Taylor, who I'll introduce in a moment. What you've just seen is a combination of videos highlighting the work of our panelists who are sitting here to my left. I want to remind people to please go ahead and submit your questions on Slido. To submit the questions on Slido, open slido.com if you haven't already. The code is #SUST, and go to the questions tab. You can vote up other people's questions. I've been monitoring them. We had 11 the last time I looked. So go ahead and vote up other people's questions, and I'll warn our panelists, those questions that I prepared ahead of time for you to, think about this morning, might not raise to the top since we've got, a lot of questions coming in from our participatory audience in the room and around the world. And then a new thing, you can also reply to questions. So if you have, if you see questions that you'd like to engage with the previous questioner, go ahead and reply. And as Pete mentioned, we will make this information available to folks afterwards if you can't keep up. So I want to do a brief introduction of our panelists.
Super quick, you don't need to actually put the hashtag in when you're on Slido. So it's just type in SUST. So if some of you are watching and having trouble, try that.
Thanks, Beth. So I'll introduce those here in the room, starting with on my left. Scott Spicer is the University of Minnesota Media Outreach and Learning Spaces Librarian. In this role, he leads Media Services, a program dedicated to supporting the development of media literacy skill sets and the promotion of deeper subject knowledge and meaningful, authentic learning experiences, such as the one you just saw with students through the integration of media resources and student-produced media into curriculum. To his left is Beth Mercer-Taylor. She's the Sustainability Education Co-Director here at the University of Minnesota's Institute on the Environment. Beth brings a multidisciplinary background to sustainability education, having degrees in religion, public policy, and law, which may surprise some of the people who have worked with her and not known her background. She oversees the sustainability studies minor work, is teaching a Grand Challenge class currently, and supports the I&E educator programs and a whole slew of new initiatives around sustainability education. And our third panelist is Dom Travis. He is an associate professor in the Department of Veterinary Population Medicine. He's an expert in wildlife epidemiology and veterinary public health. I give my best regards to the closed captioner typing away as I speak, focusing on emerging health and natural resource sustainability issues at the interface of wildlife, domestic animals, and humans. His current research interests focus on interactions between animal-human health and biodiversity, food and water security, and the global wildlife trade. So we have an interesting mix of folks. And I was going to start with my own questions, but there were some ones getting upvoted, so I'm going to start with the top one. And that is around Indigenous rights, and how do those of us who are not Indigenous keep Indigenous rights, history, ways of knowing, and thinking in the forefront of our teaching in sustainability education. So I'll let Scott, to my left, jump in first. He had originally volunteered with some other questions, but I'll let him kick off our panel responses.
Right. So I don't know that I'm necessarily the very best person to speak on this. I can just tell you from a media production standpoint, because we've dealt isn't the right term, but we've had several media projects over the years that have in some way intersected with Indigenous communities, and there's a lot of sensitivities that need to go into it, without overgeneralizing. Whenever you're working with Indigenous communities, one would be thinking about how they're, especially non-native peoples representing other cultures is really important to consider. There are issues around being visible, so recording can be a real issue. Beyond that, though, even if you are able to get an interview on camera, for example, or use an image or audio, there might be some heightened sensitivities about making that material publicly accessible, and part of what we do, or what I encourage, is public engagement with these assignments. And so there's just on the media project side of things, there's a lot of considerations, I would say, beyond, of course, the sort of historical challenges that we've faced with our outreach to Indigenous communities.
Thanks, Scott. Beth? I'm going to reflect on some ways that I think putting an Indigenous approach at the forefront just offers hope, healing, and a really better path for people to think about the problems that we call sustainability, which from an Indigenous perspective, that's not even a word that would be used. But I think about here in Minnesota, the Ojibwe language, the Anishinaabe people who are, their homelands would be north of where we are right now in the Twin Cities. And the language has words that reflect changes in the seasons of plants and animals. So there are different names depending on seasonality, which really, like, if you think about the cultural view coming from that way that language is constructed, it reflects a really close tie to seasonal change, and plants and animals as like so close to us as humans that they have multiple names depending on how they are in a season. And as you learn Ojibwe language, like, you come to learn phonology, that's the English word, but you come to learn really deep lessons about seasonal change. And then you might start to notice that what's the words for the month. So the Ojibwe language, the word for March is when the ice breaks. Well, what happens when the month word and the weather around you isn't the same, and how does that affect the way you think? And the other thing I think about from an Indigenous perspective, oppressions, and some of us I think are really feeling quite challenged by the state of our politics right now, but issues of how systems don't work for people and don't work for communities have been part of the story for Indigenous peoples in North America for a long time. So there's an ability to persist and continue in day-to-day life in the face of something that feels really difficult and overwhelming. And I take a lot of hope from that. I think it's important to know that there are Native people amongst us now. So I'm Métis, so I'm a white presenting person. I've grew up in a white culture, but my background is one that's mixed. So Métis people are recognized First Nations in Canada, not as much here in the United States. But there are Native students, faculty, communities all around us. Our tribal colleges here in Minnesota, they're part of that land grant system that we're really often talking about here at University of Minnesota Twin Cities. And think about how many times we could reach out to a tribal college or to students who are in a tribal college or community and be just engaging them. And what kind of new perspectives and opportunity and joy that really brings. So I think it's a great way to do better in sustainability, to really just put Native people and Indigenous approaches at the forefront. It feels better. So that's my answer.
So I want to make 2 points. One is surrounding work with those that would like to help through engaging and partnering with Indigenous communities, and the other is how do you embed that into teaching. So my frame, as you saw, is ecosystem health, which poses that it's a discipline created in the 90s, and the whole point of it is participatory approaches. So it engages social science and hard sciences together in research-based approaches to kind of new solutions. I was part of a grant with our School of Public Health and the Department of Health in Minnesota that actually covered the entire, we covered the Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and part of Iowa. And a big aim of it was to engage Indigenous communities on how we can partner more on health. And through all the talking circles held amongst many of the communities, this idea of ecosystem health, this interconnectedness, this holistic approach was one of the things that they most embraced in terms of we could partner with you on this. So our group engages not just in the United States, but actually all over the world, many communities and cultures through this lens, this approach. And the biggest challenge to that is that even though we mean really, really well, we don't know how to do things right, just bluntly. So the learning curve for those of us that are not anthropologists and ethnographers and or, the learning curve is so steep that the number of mistakes you can make, accidentally being just either wrong or insensitive, and build partnerships and help all at the same time is really complex. So the second point of that is, how do you then mirror that in teaching? So Scott and I were giggling at each other because our class, which is team taught between people from the Humphrey School of Medicine, School of Public Health, and College of Veterinary Medicine, among others, is project-based, and you just saw one example of our film festival at the end, and our teams choose projects. And often they choose to projects that are, how can we portray communities and help? How do we stand up for them? They have a passion for standing up for them. And for the last week, we just tried to find a way to help one of our teams figure out how to work with or represent the issues of land and tribal rights and things. And honestly, just yesterday and last night, well into the evening, the student groups discussed and we decided that's not an appropriate project because the film festival part of that is not the outward-facing part of that. There's no way to do that right. And so even though they're passionate about this subject, if we can't do this right, so they're going to pick up land use and other types of things and challenges, but without a community-based partner and without the appropriate way to do that, we're going to find a bit more straightforward and simple way for them, because we're just learning, and I learned a lot in the last week trying to find ways to help the students help of where the lines are. And I think that's a challenge, is we mean really well, but how do we, when we partner or when we teach, help get that fundamental knowledge?
Thank you, Dom. I think we have a lot to continue in our learning process, and also a humility and an openness to relationships. Our next question is around how we might be able to share some of the learnings that you have had in higher education with those who are in the K-12 system, particularly in grades 8 through 12. And so what are some examples of successful teaching strategies that you would recommend in order to help those students to see sustainability as being relatable to their daily lives, which I think is something that continues on our lifelong journey of learning. So Scott, I see you're nodding, so I'm going to ask you to go ahead and start first.
Well, so the resource I designed was for really for K-12 and higher ed, but K-12 focused. I don't have a lot of outreach to K-12. I'm hoping, just to put a plug out here, that after today, folks will reach out to me though from that demographic, and we'll do some workshops and things like that. I'm biased, but I do think the media projects that I've set forth are an excellent way to connect students to these issues in a very personalized and, as Tom teed up, kind of bite-sized ways. You know, in his case, they were talking about the field trips, but whether it's using a personal narrative, digital story to reflect upon one's relationship to an issue, or sort of a documentary style type of video to look at an issue from multiple perspectives. There are a lot of different directions that one can go and align them with their curriculum. So I think that is one potential solution, and I hope that, again, the resource that I created could really be useful in inspiring instructors and teachers to move in that direction.
If I might add, that resource is publicly available online.
It is, and I tweeted it out, but it's c.umn.edu/sustainability media projects.
And we'll make sure that that's on the website as well for people who want to look for it later. Thank you. Beth?
I do have a lot of thoughts and also partners that I want to shout out on in answer to this question. There's a new program for those of you in Minnesota called Minnesota Green Step Schools, and we'll share that with you. And that's a chance for schools that want to take steps in sustainability from wherever they start, whether they're already an environmental magnet school or whether they're just getting started, to just move forward at whatever is the right pace and the right approach for their community. And I think that's a great way to bridge work in facilities and energy, issues around health and wellness and sustainability and environmental education. I also think for those of you thinking about working in schools and those of you who are educators in the K-12 system, I've learned a lot from a colleague who's an INE fellow, Jonay Coleman-Brigham, who thinks about water or energy as part of a story. And we all know the power of stories. But think about what it would be like to teach energy. And my colleague that I teach Pathways to Renewable Energy, Paul Imbertson, is here in the room, and he also has been a convert to this idea. If you look at the plug, and you start with the plug, or the outlet on the wall, the plug for the appliance, and you ask students to think, what goes behind the wall? Where do those wires end? What is the actual distribution of that energy all the way back to the plant? How does that whole system vibrate together? What does that sound like, look like, feel like, even smell like? Could you go walk near that substation with the students? So actually think about that as a story. It's really a powerful approach. No pun intended there. Working with small kids, I think there's another question here about water. Kids love water. And what if instead of teaching the water cycle as something that's kind of a overarching, hard science concept that might put off some kids like me. I was once a kid put off by science that started and ended, it seemed, with math. You ask them to figure out, to be an investigator, where does the water in their water fountain come from? Go follow the pipes and go out to the street and use chalk and mark where the water pipes are and find where the water tower is. And anyway, we run a camp here in the summer called Water Journey Camps, and we do just that. And we have a beautiful curriculum for that we can also share. That's something you could pick up and use in a K-12 context as well.
I have a really easy answer to this. To me, health and sustainability are the same thing. So in the health sciences, everything we do is focused on some form of sustainability. And that's kind of a rough cut answer at that. I have two examples. For the last 15 years, we've been partnering with Jane Goodall in Gombe National Park on her chimpanzee research, and Mike Wilson, who's in our community as an eco-anthropologist, is one of the leads of that. And the first question was, what, if anything, is the biggest threat to the sustainability of the chimps? And quickly, this became the ecosystem health project, because the chimps, the park, the habitat, the people surrounding the park are all connected, and you can't think of just one strand of the spider web. You have to think of the spider web. And that has been a wonderful thing, because we've also watched Jane start proselytizing on health a little bit more. And the feedback we've gotten is, since this project started to focus on health, the relationship between the park and the people has increased. So focus on health. What part of any class, any grade, is there that health does not matter? And so I think there's a lot of modules and connectedness. And when I was at Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago, we worked with the Chicago Department of Public Health to use the zoo as a platform for spreading health and sustainability messaging, because we had conservation science and health all together, and it was a very holistic approach. So I think it's easy to do, takes a little design, but use sustainability and health as a combined way to think about this.
Thank you. I also want to let those know that are contributing on Slido that there have been some replies of people been contributing some of their own answers to those questions. So I'd encourage you to participate if you'd like to reply to other questions. We'll make sure that those questions that we've gone through, that's available later.
Yeah, and we have a librarian who's a partner with our educators program, who is really excited to create a great database of these resources. So it's not just for those of us who are so interested to learn. We're also going to share that through the University of Minnesota libraries. Scott is a partner with her too. So please do contribute.
Actually, we should have Kathy Jordan share her program at some point as well. Sorry to call you out, but Children in Health and Sustainability.
Oh yeah, Children in Nature Network, yes. And also here in Minnesota, climate generation, I think, deserves a call out.
Great. We'll make sure that those are linked so that people can easily find them. So our third question has to do with degrowth. So how does the concept of moving away from treating GDP and consumption as measures of economic success, or in short, degrowth, fit into sustainability education?
Pass. Chimps, health, disease.
Well, actually, all you have to do is start looking at the actual emissions trend and GDP trends for the developed world, both Europe and the United States, and you can see that decoupling is already happening. I'm not sure you would call that quite degrowth, but I think that most people do not actually understand that it is possible to continue economic development without driving greenhouse gas emissions up. It's a really fundamental and important concept, and I think a lot of our political arguments are stuck in not understanding that. So I would take that question and kind of step back to that, just doing the education, looking at the data on what's possible.
Yeah, I'm going to pass, although I do think the fast fashion video did try to put forth some kind of effort to at least, if not decouple GDP, at least try to use some kinds of new measurements to increasingly inform our buying habits, which are capitalist-based. And we've seen that work with organics and it seems to me in other types of sustainability-related efforts. So maybe, I'm speaking out of turn here because I'm not an expert in this area, but it seems to me that maybe, some of those social awareness interventions might be useful.
I unpass. Can I unpass?
Yeah, go for it.
So, quiz question. How does eating a bat in the central part of China
Oh, good. I knew this would
equal
come up.
global economic strife? So I don't know how to answer that question, except to say that this is all connected, and just measuring the normal outputs of things without including the spider web again matters.
There was a coronavirus emergent.
SARS.
Oh, it was SARS. Okay, but I thought there was a slide that you threw in there.
Oh, that was, yeah, we mapped out and did a systems diagram and have been working through the corona case study in our class so far this semester. And yesterday we got to the communications, the emergency response, the economics, that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
I just want to plug an interdisciplinary program because I have been thinking for the last 24 hours about how Dominic would explain how the sustainability issues around coronavirus, and the fact that I even understand that that's a really pressing topic is because we have these interdisciplinary programs. So just that's really important.
Coronavirus is a food security conversation and a conversation about culture and the way people define food, and the disease is an unintended consequence of cultural norms. And I think we need to look at it through that lens instead of shut down the world, oh no. Let's look at culture, food security, and how people make decisions and the unintended consequences of those decisions. That is the way I would frame coronavirus and sustainability.
So I'd actually, as a moderator, I'd also like to pop in to answer this question, which I think is a really important one and one that we need to continue grappling with, even though I think the responses that you've seen here initially are partially due to the importance and also the complexity of looking at our economic systems. But I'd like to make a pitch for systems thinking as someone who teaches that, and you've heard it quite a bit in our presentations. You saw a map that had been made around fashion and interconnections. I feel like this is really central to be part of our educational process and the way that we teach and learn, and also encourage students of all ages to to become critical thinkers of these causal relationships, as some examples that you've heard here. So I really see this as being a central issue in sustainability, and one in which we can really take a systems approach to thinking, and also something that I heard throughout the videos was this idea that Tom Beery mentioned it in Sweden. It was also mentioned in the other videos of how important sustainability is for all disciplines, and I think this is also another huge opportunity for us to take a transdisciplinary approach. So I'm seeing more replies popping up in there, and so please keep interacting online. As I said earlier, this is a conversation that will continue, and challenges that hopefully will be building relationships from our conversations today that we can work on together. So the next one, as Beth had already seen a preview of, is around water. Water seems to have a special role in motivating people to work on sustainability. Why is that? Does anyone want to jump in?
I think we are water. We're born in water, so I wonder if it's something about that. But I know Ann Kapuscinski, who I mentioned in the video that you saw, also thinks that like the water and the oceans kind of have a special relationship to humans and are kind of telling us things we need to know, or calling us into relationship with large bodies of water. It's sort of a metaphysical, maybe a religious type of answer. I don't know.
So I also think when you look at all the futures groups, most of them say that water insecurity is one of the biggest threats to general sustainability, usually focused on human sustainability, but and so I think that comes up and is starting to be recognized more and more. And living in this region, we obviously get that to some degree, since we're both very lucky and also trying to figure out proactively, I think, in the media, all the sustainability here as well. So, I mean, I think we're in the place at the time where water may matter more than anything else, even more than coronavirus.
From a purely media literacy perspective, Dom just mentioned it, water lends itself really well to visual and audio. You think about the polar bear on the ice cap, you think about rising sea waters. I mean, there's all these sort of, and of course being in Minnesota, we're around rivers, but water is something that's very accessible. One of the more successful video investigation classes I've supported is water policy in the Humphrey School, for example. So it's harder, e-waste, like yes, you can show, tons of electronics and whatever, you can show some of the other sort of ways in which sustainability touches on people's lives, but water is something that's very, I think, immediate to people, and there's a lot of media around water, and so people can visualize and personalize that issue.
Thank you. Speaking of the personal, this next question is around mental health, and how do we address the emotional toll of working within sustainability and climate issues, particularly when, as we just talked about, economic systems, when we feel like we're working against what might seem to be immovable societal and political ideologies.
I'll answer for Tom Beery since he's not here, but I remember our conversation about nature bathing, which is his answer, and it is the idea of not hiking, not taking a trail run, but actually thinking about spending time without a device where you're just immersed in nature. I think particularly a forest. So he believes that works. Try it.
I think confronting the complexity head on and wrestling with it. And this is where, again, reflective interventions, I think, are really useful.
There's nothing more core to my health equals sustainability conversation than the mental aspect of that. And we know that when we talk about pretty much any conversation. So I think keeping that in the systems map always and looking how to put it into an optimization model where it's included and protected is key.
Thank you. I think our panelists are recognizing that we're running a little low on time. but certainly there are a lot of mental health resources, and eco grief is a topic of interest and of conversation. I think I have 5 more minutes. Is that right, or are we at time? Can I take one more question? Maybe.
Begrudgingly.
Yes.
We'll go.
Yes. All right. So we have we'll do a quick one. Scott, what is the most moving sustainability documentary you have ever seen? So we'll take this as our last question, but please feel free to keep contributing online. Wow.
I don't have an answer right away. I mean, probably.
Okay. Well.
Yeah, that's a pretty loaded question because, yeah, the Inconvenient Truth obviously is the one that a lot of people are going to go to, but I don't know if that's the one that I would necessarily recommend.
Dom has one.
Okay, there's a TED Talk by our colleague at Bemidji State University, Erica Bailey Johnson, and it puts wellness and mental health as part of that at the center of sustainability. It's an indigenous approach to sustainability, so check it out, Erica Bailey Johnson. We'll put a link in.
I have nothing as close to home as this, but it's close to where I work. The award-winning documentary Virunga is spectacular, and it's the plight of Congolese parks and mountain gorillas and things, and human sustainability in eastern DRC.
I do want to put a plug in for Andrew Zimmern's What's Eating America's last week's episode of Overcooked, in which case he had a number of different case studies on the impact of climate change on farming, and that's right now on MSNBC. If you can get access. So if you are I don't know that it was touching, but it was very illustrative. Let's just put it that way.
Great, and I feel like there'll be more to share online. So we're now going to move into a short break. Please watch the screen for upcoming opportunities. There will be information continuing online for the next 10 minutes for those not in person. And we'll be ready to learn about eco-literacy at the University of Minnesota Duluth at 10:40. So stay tuned or be back and join us here in 8 short minutes. I'd like to remind folks to share resources, whether they're in person, in the rooms that you're in across the 5 University of Minnesota campuses, or you can also tweet them at us. Thanks.
I followed you 11 months. I let you down more than once. I know my words, they hurt you bad, but you never asked me to take them back. Now I'm alone in Wonderland, wondering how the time went past. The sky is blue, it always is. The weather comes but doesn't last. I'm just a human with a lot to lose, but I wanna be fresh water for you. Fresh water for you. Drive by pastures dripping green, rolling hills like stitching seams. The harvest moon hangs low again. I'd like to learn to be your friend, 'cause I'm alone in Wonderland, wondering how the time went past. The sky is blue, it always is. The weather comes but doesn't last. I'm just a human with a lot to lose, but I wanna be fresh water for you. Fresh water tired story, tired fear. I want it all within the year. This is the same America. We're all wishing on a dream, but so many fell asleep. Old like grandpa, old like loss. Go on now, give fate a toss. You're living in America, you can't count on anything. Empty promise, empty bowls. We got good ideas, can't patch the holes, but we're living in America. We're all counting on this thing. Fresh like linen, like lemonade, bound as we are to fade away. I'm living in America and I don't count on anything. Hope the sunrise, hope for change, while America goes up in flames. The screens, the money rob us clean, a cheap shot hit right to the knees. America, you're a sight to see. Oh, say, can you see? Oh, say, can you see? I can't count on you, but you've been left to me. I went to walking along a cool stream, and the world so real became a dream. Fruit hanging heavy and birds that sing. Mother, I fear that I may never leave. Then came the rain with the evening twilight, and the geese in the meadow resting from flight. Lamp-born blush pink amongst golden trees. Father, forgive me, I may never leave. I met a man with his hands in the dirt, played punk music for veggies and wore a black shirt. Carrots and cabbage, the last and the first. Sister, come visit and taste what there were. The mushrooms arrived as the August moon waned, and I howled through canyons, perhaps went insane. Brother, believe me, you'll love this place, where the seasons run fast and the mountains still wait. 3 months have passed and I must away. Depart the valley, white buffalo reigns. A sweet wind will guide me in circles around, till the day I return to plant roots in the ground. Till the day I return to plant roots in the ground. I followed you 11 months. I let you down more than once. I know my words, they hurt you bad, but
Hello and welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your snacks. We're about to go back to live stream and continue our presentations. Well, thank you for joining us again. We hope you had a nice break. We're going to go ahead and start with our next parts of the presentations. You will see up next, you will learn a bit about recycling at the University of Minnesota Duluth. And we hope you think about on your campus or where you live, how you can incorporate recycling into your daily habits. We'll also get into a program called Eco-Literacy. It's a program about environmental education at the University of Minnesota, Rochester. And after that, we'll get into some more tools and stories from presenters here in the Twin Cities, which will be followed up with the panel. You can submit questions again on the question and answer part of Slido. In that panel, we will have a discussion from Clement Liu from Morris talking about wellness and well-being, very related to our past part. And then Mindy Granley from Duluth will be talking about how to catalyze student projects and collaboration in her campus. And then we'll have David Wilsey talking about how to prepare students for international sustainable development. Hope you enjoy the rest of the show, and thank you for being here.
I try to think about sustainability. I try to teach sustainability in terms of flourishing and wellness. And I think when you think about flourishing and wellness, it makes you attend to things that interfere with flourishing and wellness. And in many cases, when it comes to people, what that is are political, economic, and social injustices. Right? And I think that keeps one focused on equity as being an important element of sustainability, right? And I think sometimes, right, depending on the rhetoric, it's easy to forget that equity is a key element of sustainability. But when you're thinking about flourishing and wellness, I think that forces you to attend to that. And so I tend to be really careful to have my students thinking about sustainability in kind of the broad terms of flourishing and wellness, so that they don't get too locked into like one element of it, right? So they don't get too locked into environmental issues, they don't get too locked into economic, or they don't get too locked into social. They're thinking about those how those three interplay with wellness in mind as being the thing that we're trying to promote. I think if there are sort of theories and stuff, or theories or tools or resources I refer to a lot, it tends to be things less to do with thinking about the holistic nature of sustainability, or but more to do with the inclusion part. So I've noticed that one sort of concept I refer to a lot is the notion of informed consent. So I often, when I'm thinking about equity and inclusion, the way I think about how people are appropriately involved is through the lens of informed consent, and thinking about like what's required for informed consent as just sort of a model, thinking like, when is something fair, right? So I tend to think of things being fair as when they involve all the folks who are stakeholders for some topic, having like the appropriate information to make decisions, to having like the capacity to use information in ways that allow them to promote their own welfare, and then being appropriately autonomous in making decisions based on like, you know, what the information says about what they should be choosing to promote their own welfare. That's something I think is pretty common, but that's something pretty common in the way I think about things and the way I teach things. But that has less to do with the holistic part, more thinking about like, you know, when you're thinking about wellness holistically, how do you promote it amongst different people, particularly when there's competing interests? I think it's my own biases, right? So, I mean, there are definite ways that I think about wellness and think about what flourishing means. And I have to be careful to make sure that sort of my inclinations and my biases for how to understand those concepts don't color the things I'm teaching, or don't inappropriately color the things I'm teaching. I think it's unavoidable that my biases will make it into the content somehow. So I'm always really careful to indicate to students like what my own personal biases are and my own sort of positions are, so that, you know, they're aware that, right, the content is chosen by me often, and that content's going to represent my perspectives about the world, and to ask them to be careful to like think of other perspectives and to attend to other perspectives. Then I tend to try to be careful to like find content and sources that I don't agree with, to ensure that, like, you know, that when I'm teaching, I'm not just sort of right, just teaching my own biases to students. So yeah, I do think the biggest obstacle is my preconceived notions about what wellness and flourishing means, and making sure that there's space to think about other perspectives when it comes to wellness and flourishing.
One of the tools that I use in my work is just to be opportunistic about what's happening around campus and how I can get students involved. Watching what's going on around campus, what are the issues, what are students wanting to get involved in, and finding the faculty who are doing really neat stuff like the flipped classroom and community engaged learning, and putting those partners together and creating great projects. I think the efforts that students make, even in their student organizations and clubs, make a huge difference in their learning and their professionalism and their skills. Taking that knowledge they're learning in the classroom and applying it is a really exciting part of how I help students in their sustainability journey. One of my favorite examples of this is the UMD SUN delegation, or the Solar University Network delegation. That's a group of students who get together and just raise awareness and support for solar, and try to push UMD to invest more in solar and find great projects. The UMD SUN delegation's accomplishments are not just helping increase solar on campus, but also gaining a lot of skills for their future career paths and internships, jobs, helping write grants, helping develop budgets for grants, helping report on grants, helping develop long-term maintenance plans for solar, and speaking in front of groups. They've been traveling and just gaining a lot of experience outside the classroom. And a lot of the students will say it's one of their favorite things that they do after they graduate, was being part of that group skills.
We're a group of students from across campus, so an interdisciplinary group, and we basically all got together and said we wanted to see more solar. We looked at different pathways to solar, and one of the biggest barriers was funding. So we asked our fellow students and our student body for funding for solar, and we're granted that. I mean, we went to all kinds of different committee meetings with pictures and posters, and so it was interesting to see how that kind of happens. We learned about making maintenance plans and working with our local utilities, so it was a pretty great experience. And so there's a lot more to come in the next couple of years, and I see great things for UMD and sustainability at UMD. I really believe that this is something that's right and that is good not only for UMD but just for our greater community, and I think that that's an important thing, to be able to have those discussions with people about things you're passionate about.
One of my favorite partnerships with faculty has been with two engineering faculty. Dr. Allison Hoxie and Dr. Mary Christensen and I worked with community players in the city of Duluth, and then a nonprofit called Equilibrium 3, and then also with our local utility, Minnesota Power, and we developed a Duluth Shines class, which meant helping students get together in teams and going out in the community paired with businesses and organizations to investigate solar, to investigate energy efficiency and other sustainability type questions. So a lot of the analysis that they did was sort of high level, but some of it was really fundamental to what businesses and organizations could do with their own building or with their own assets. The students learn a lot working with clients and serving the client's needs and trying to answer those questions that they have with their skills. And it develops a lot of their professional skills along with their technical skills. The funnest part, I think, is that along the way the students develop a lot of perspective, and they really get some empathy with what a business owner or an organization is dealing with, whether that's budget or finance challenges or building challenges, old infrastructure, those real world things that I think will help make them better engineers in the future. I think some of the challenges of doing community-based work or community engaged work can be expectations. I think projects and partnerships can fail when there's not enough agreement or when folks don't get on the same page about what can actually be accomplished and what's required. When we're working with businesses or organizations, we try to be really clear about what's actually possible. The students sometimes need more data than folks are willing to give, so one of the limitations can be lack of data, and the students have to sort of improvise and make decisions with very little data, sort of like how all of us have to do in the real world. And I think that's a great lesson for the students to learn too, is that you have to sometimes work around not having all the data that you want or need. So another lesson that we've learned is to make sure we keep track of all the sustainability projects that have been done so that we don't have students repeating the same project over and over, but to build upon each other and sort of scaffold results and projects to keep moving things forward. We built a student project list of ideas, and then also started to archive the projects that have been completed so that it's easy to go in, look at what has been completed, what the opportunities are, and find a project that's right for you.
For me, teaching within the Masters of Development Practice program, sustainability education happens for a largely interdisciplinary and international cohort of students who represent something like 60% of our cohort on an average basis. For us, classroom learning is, of course, the centerpiece of what we do. Trying to figure out how to do sustainability education in the classroom has to do with both content and process, skill development as well. But we also have a huge field-based learning component in our program, 10 weeks in the field in the summer, and then a client-based project that encompasses almost the full second year of the program. For me, the sweet spot is trying to figure out how to integrate those two things into a hybrid model, which happens on campus, in the classroom, but that integrates a lot of the elements of what happens in the field. So that risky, unpredictable, unstructured learning environment that is the result of having an actual real project with a client unfolding in real time. How do you bring some of those skills into the classroom? That's the challenge I'm trying to figure out with my project. And what we do is we unfold that over the course of a year with a combination of classroom learning that reflects that hybrid journey, and then culminating in a field placement that lasts the entire summer of the first year. We put this together in a model that really represents and reflects what we're trying to do and accomplish in the program. It's a combination of classroom curriculum and practical experience that are linked in the middle, but that are also embedded within networks made up of professional and university contacts that are helping us to both augment the skill sets for our students, but also to situate the learning experience in a real-world project that unfolds both in the classroom and in the real world.
Yes, this class is unique. Out of all the courses I've taken till date, it's unique because it's not like, you know, there's a certain path to it. I would say the term I would use is chaotic. There's some certain element of chaos into it. It's not a straight line. And that's different about this course from the other courses. And I think he specifically tries to keep it that way. And I think it's working, specifically with what he's trying to do with the course. One of the major impacts it has had on me in my learning is that it's challenging me to look inwards. A lot of our courses, we talk about the world, the problems with the world, about data, about statistics, about solutions, but then this course places me in the center, brings me back into the issue as well. So a lot of assignments we do is much about reflecting on these issues. So what it means to us, what it means to me, and it's also connecting me to my identity. And yeah, those are some of the things that I've noticed, but not all.
How do you think it's going to prepare you for what you want to do in this program?
So first thing, I think, coming into this program, I had a certain area that I wanted to get into, but as I explored the courses, what was being taught in class, things weren't clear anymore. There were all these aspects, different issues with the world that caught my attention, and I don't know where to start, where to go to next. And my interests are now much wider. And this, because this course forces me to self-reflect, I'm confident that as I keep on doing what this course is prepping me to do, I'll figure that out, what I want to do. And that could actually bring something novel out. And that would bring something creative out in terms of addressing these issues or understanding these issues. That's how I think the course will prep me in this course and perhaps beyond as I keep applying whatever.
Yeah, how is this course helping you engage with topics in sustainability?
Oh, that's a very interesting question, because for me, when I talked about sustainability or listened about sustainability, it was always about like climate change, it was always about green growth, and something to do with the climate and basically the environment. But when we are taking this course, it's also about thinking. And that's a very different concept of sustainability, because you are not just thinking from one perspective, but you are thinking about 4 different perspectives. And it also kind of reflects me back to some of my experience in Nepal. I generally thought cutting trees is bad for the environment and we should never cut trees, and this is deforestation. One tree cut and you are like, this landslide of deforestation is going to happen. But there is a mechanism of sustainably cutting trees, and in fact it is the resources that you as a human use it, but it's just that you have to know about this, how and when and how to cut trees. So basically that's where I got back to the learnings, and it's just that not from one perspective but from different ways of knowing. Yeah.
And so how is this, for going and doing work in topics of sustainability, how is it preparing you? Is it preparing you?
I think it's definitely preparing me. I can't say that I'm prepared, but I'm on the process of preparing, and I guess this is what the course is also about. It's about ways of knowing. You will never know for sure, but there are different ways of knowing. And for sustainability is something that's always very complex because there are so many tentacles that's always spreading. When I was growing up, I thought that climate change was only about ozone layer, but now it's about melting ice in Arctic, and it's about, you know, rising water, sea levels. So it's definitely making me think about there is not just one way to look at the issue. And it's always better if you are going to be a decision maker at some point of time, it's always better to have more than one perspective on stuff and issues.
What do you think is hard about working on sustainability issues?
Because there's never one answer. And when you think that this is a good answer, it's somehow explicitly or indirectly implicate, like having a negative implication somewhere else. That's also something that I think that this course will have, like, you know, makes us learn, because some decisions that you think will be good for one aspect will not necessarily have a good impact in others. But you have to weigh that down, which is more important and what priority must be given in.
You know, for me, the hardest thing about this work is that I'm trying to do education, sustainability education, with real cases in real time. And so the hazards associated with real cases in real time are pretty significant when you're working within a course, a university course that has a course time and has predetermined meeting dates and meeting times and a vacation week and all of the internal and associated limitations that go with a class time. And that coupled with the limitations and challenges and opportunities that go with doing community engaged work. And what I notice is really challenging over the years is to try to find projects that are at a point where they're amenable to what we do in the class to some extent during the course journey, meeting the learning objectives that we have for the course at the right time in a way that allows for engagement and the project that we're working on to take its natural course. So I don't think I have to go too much further to explain to you that that is incredibly challenging and fraught with hazards that might disrupt the course and the learning objectives. And to some extent, it's okay to say, well, things happen and things change and we're going to make do and we're going to adapt and be flexible. And of course, I say all of those things. But I think when you make a commitment to a group of students in the syllabus, you are somewhat bound to honor it and you do the best you can. And likewise, when you make a commitment to a client or a partner, you are obliged to engage that partner in a respectful and responsible way that's ethical, right? And that is privileges their needs and timing more so than the learning experience that is designed to serve it. And so the real hazard for me is trying to reconcile those two things and to do it in the structure of a classroom. It's a challenge worth taking, and it's a risk worth taking, but I think it's really at the crux of where a lot of my challenges in teaching sustainability occur, and it's the thing that I think about and probably lose the most sleep about in trying to address them. But I'll tell you what, when it works, it's brilliant.
Okay, we're going to move into our next panel, and Beth Mercer-Taylor is going to be moderating this panel with these educators you just saw present. So once again, you can submit a question on Slido and upvote to have us discuss it here.
Fantastic. So yes, it's for those of you who might be joining us again, it's slido.com, and then you just type in SUST, S-U-S-T, to get your question included from wherever you are. I'm going to turn to your questions on Slido shortly, but first I'm going to introduce the panelists. You've seen them, but just to get everyone on the same page again. So first to my left is Dave Wilsey, who's a director and a faculty member in the Master of Development program at the Affairs here at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. Formerly, he was an associate extension professor who worked on natural resource-based livelihoods and food systems. He was in the Peace Corps at one point as well, and he's worked with tribal communities and subsistence agricultural communities across the world. To his left is Mindy Granley, who served as the sustainability director at University of Minnesota at Duluth until very recently. And those of us who are her colleagues are happy for the news that she's now the director of sustainability for the city of Duluth, but we're also really sad to see her go. Hopefully we continue with community university partnerships, so she does not go far from us. Her professional background includes water resources, building sciences, carbon action planning, and she's actually certified as an energy manager. And her work, as you've seen, has engaged University of Minnesota Duluth students, faculty, community members across all the different disciplines and ways of knowing and approaches in real-world sustainability projects. And then to her left is Clement Liu, an assistant professor of environmental studies and the student success coordinator at the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Intercultural Programs at the University of Minnesota at Morris. He is one of the coordinators of the new Sustainability Leadership minor at Morris and an active contributor to the Association for Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education, or ASHE. I didn't make the acronym. And they have a diversity, equity, and inclusion team. They're actually working on a toolkit that's going to get released soon, so keep your eyes open for that. And he's quite engaged in student affairs professional organizations. So thank you for that. And I have some questions, as you know, ready, panelists. But I think it looks like we've got our Slido audience ready to go, and I like this first question that's risen to the top. So how can the University of Minnesota work to help communities work on and measure sustainability progress? And I guess you could think about that, communities beyond Minnesota too, but of course we are here at the University of Minnesota. I think, Clement, you look like you have an answer.
I don't know if I have a complete answer, but I think we could start by thinking about the fact that we have resources for gathering information, right? And we have a lot of experience with, well, a lot of us have experience working with communities, doing community engagement, and a lot of us think about how do we involve people into conversations, right? So I think we could be sort of, right, the forum where folks can come and have conversations about these topics, right? I think we have the resources and the expertise to help facilitate that.
I agree. Being a new member of the city of Duluth, I'll just tell you that the resource and capacity are limited at the local level often, and we need help. We need people to help push for innovation and try things and measure things and help us better understand things and partner with us. So I think another way folks can get involved is to join a board or commission locally. Start to learn what the issues are in your community. Some of the work that I did when I was at UMD was really related to people I had met through being on different boards and being active in our local community and helping advise on decision making. So get out there and go to a meeting and listen to what the issues are in your community and then bring that back to your work at the university.
I think the message you hear most often about a question like this is how can the university in some way, do something to support the state or communities? The answer that you hear most often is with our research, right? That's kind of the stock standard response. We can provide research and evidence and apply those to real world issues and problems. And that's absolutely true, but I think something that gets understated a little bit is the importance of playing a role in creating partnerships, creating and facilitating partnerships, framing the way we think about questions and issues and challenges and then helping to facilitate and being part of the facilitation of the process of addressing those challenges. So not just adding the research, kind of like here's information and add information to problem and it's solved, but really how do we think about the problem, how do we engage the problem, what types of frames do we need to look at them, which drive the research incidentally, and then also kind of navigating the process and facilitating and engaging in the process. Through our student work, through our faculty research, and also through other mechanisms that we have that are maybe not associated with faculty and students so much, but you know, some of the non-curricular and co-curricular activities that happen at the school.
I'm just going to add a couple University of Minnesota resources. Those of you with me know already about the Grand Challenge curriculum and the Grand Challenge research initiatives here at the University of Minnesota. But for those of you beyond, you should check that out because it's both a research approach and funding mechanism, and it's also an approach to classes and bringing research and engagement into the classroom and partnering students and communities in solving or asking deeper questions or moving us forward on some of the biggest issues that we face, including most, related in some way to sustainability. So I have another question, unless there's a follow-up.
I just want to add to something that Dave said and that you were talking about. I was actually remiss to mention that at the institution I'm at Morris, we're engaging with some community conversations about sustainability and like community sustainability through what we call the Morris model, right? That's working with some of the folks from Extension, some of the folks from our sustainability office, folks from our facilities and management office, working with the county, the city, and plus a range of business leaders to think about how the entire city, county can become carbon neutral. So, right, there's a whole bunch of things happening through that. And so that's another model.
Students with the Morris model were at the Capitol this week on Tuesday, and they brought their representative and senator from Minnesota, who were Republican, and there were Democrats and Republicans in the room at the Capitol. So work like the Morris model is actually a really fantastic example of how this is not about party politics in any way. And I can say that from the Morris example, the politicians representing that campus really understand that sustainability and climate are important issues to youth and that they don't see this as a partisan issue. So I just wanted to plug that before we get into our next question, which is what role does sustainability play in climate action and justice?
I'll go first. I got the privilege of going last time, so I had a more thought-out answer than everybody else. So now I can have the first less thought-out answer. I think for me, one of the things that we're always trying to do in the classes that I teach is it was referenced in some of the video too, is force the students into different ways of thinking about things, or forcing them to break the way they think about something into different kind of lenses or facets of the problem or issue. And when we have the opportunity to talk about sustainability and people are motivated and engaged with the concept of sustainability, and we break that idea into its component parts, it gives us the opportunity to talk about social issues specifically in a way that we might not otherwise do if we just talk about sustainability writ large. And I think having that kind of disciplined way of breaking open a problem into 3 or more components and then spending time inhabiting each of those spaces naturally brings issues of social justice and social equality and inequality and privilege and historical trauma and income inequality, and all these things come into a conversation about the environment that may have just stayed a nature-based conversation in a different way of coming into the discussion. And so, let me see, that applies both to climate action as well as kind of more generically sustainability issues. And so I think that discipline of thinking helps a lot to bring those issues into a conversation that they get left out of, or historically got left out of a lot.
So all of my work at the UMD campus was framed around climate action. So our website was framed around our climate initiatives, and we tried to frame everything that we did, from working on food to waste to buildings to solar, is all climate action. And I think one of the things that we learned about getting students involved is oftentimes we go straight to that, what can we do? What are the individual actions that we can do? And I think that's important, and it's a great gateway to get people sort of hooked into sustainability. The harder part is to sort of broaden that thinking about what you can do as an individual and what your institution or what your campus can change. Because working on that takes longer to change. If we decide to make an action individually, we can do that tomorrow. But getting action at a campus scale around climate change takes more time, and it takes more people in the room and stakeholders, and you can't leave anyone out. You know, you have to make sure that you're representing all the voices, from the student to the folks who are paying the bills to even our community, how those decisions might affect our neighbors too. So broadening that, I think, is important, because we need action at all sectors and at all scales. How to frame that and organize it, sometimes to me, and I'm sort of a practitioner of sustainability, was what can we get done now, and looking at what's going on around us and then just jumping on that. Maybe it's not the most important thing, but sometimes it's the thing that you can do, take it and build relationships and make a little bit of progress and then go from there. So frame everything around climate, think about multiple scales, sectors, make sure everyone's at the table, and just get going. Just starting a job at the city level, thinking a lot about climate action plan. What would that look like for my city? But another part of my brain is going, okay, but what can we just get done? While we're writing this climate action plan, are there things we could just be working on and doing too? So I think a good balance of those is great, planning and action.
I think my answer for this question would be that I think about sustainability in very similar ways as Dominic, right? So I think about sustainability as being a matter of wellness and as health and flourishing. And I think keeping those in mind helps us not get sucked into the trap of like the abstractness of thinking about justice and thinking about climate action, right? We don't think about those things in terms of numbers, right? We think about like, average, CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. We're thinking about like, 1.2 degrees Celsius. We think about, concentration of particulate matter in different locations depending on winds, and then how that affects things given segregation where populations are. But I think when we're thinking about wellness and health in terms of sustainability, we remember that we're talking about people, and we're talking about the welfare of people. We're talking about ecosystems, how well they're flourishing. We're talking about non-human species and how well they're doing. Right? I think it's important to remember that we're talking about how well things are really doing, to remember, right, sort of the moral and ethical and like sort of social importance of all these things. And I think that helps us keep motivated, right? So one of the questions we had from last time was, how do we, stay motivated and like maintain sort of kind of happy balance and like, not feel bad about like all the stuff we see, is to remember that we're actually taking concrete steps to improve the welfare of all sorts of things and people. And, that's not a bad sort of thing to be engaged in. Right? That's sort of the thing that makes it easier to get through the day.
We have a lot of people who would like to know as emerging environment or sustainability professionals, and I think those of us who aren't in that category are working with people who are every day, so it's a good question. How do you get started and find a job? I'm just going to add editorially that 10 years ago I used to say to students, you have to make a job because there isn't really a sustainability job yet, but that is not true anymore. There now are jobs, but I'm going to let the panelists answer what they advise.
I'll get started. So I wasn't trained in sustainability. I was a water resource science major. I understood streams, measuring stream loads, nutrient management, watershed management. But working on those issues led me to working on climate, which led me to work on sustainability. Just get involved and raise your hand and ask the question. I think Minnesota does this well because of programs for recent graduates from college, like Green Corps. Yeah, we have one of those in the audience. Those are great training grounds. But while you're in your degree program, find ways to make it fit. And if you don't see it in your classes, reach out to your faculty and ask them. Say, where are the sustainability implications in this class that I'm taking? Or how can I do more? How can I learn more? Undergraduate research opportunity projects are great. Get involved in a student club or an organization and just start building your resume. Talk to people. Ask people to come job shadow or come talk to you in your office about your job. Make connections. I have found, working in the sustainability community, that it's a community where people share and it's a community where people are open, and it's a horseshoe, not a circle. So there's always room for people, and I'm grateful to that, and I've benefited from that. There's people in this room that have mentored me and on this panel, so thank you, Beth. But lots of us work together, and we're willing to do that for others. It's a horseshoe. Come on in and just ask questions, talk to people, network, but get involved. I often tell students that come to me and say, I really want to work in sustainability, but does that mean I should be an engineering major? Should I change my major to be a sustainability person? I was like, no, some people, T-shaped, you need the depth of knowledge, but you also need that broad knowledge of how sustainability fits in with other things. So work on both and get your faculty and professors to help you do that. If you don't see it, ask for it.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that answer. So my personal history, I stumbled into working in sustainability, right? So my training is in history and philosophy of science, right? So I started thinking about theories of evolution and how they affected the development of biology through the mid 20th century, and that I became engaged in sustainability work by being interested in the topic, and then just started doing stuff, meeting people, and opportunities presented themselves, and I took them, right? So I think, right, the thing with sustainability and environment, there's such broad fields. I don't think a particular major is the one, right? You do what you find interesting, you get involved, you meet people, you see the opportunities that present themselves by getting to know people and doing stuff, and then you take those, right? You see the thing that, Dominic, again, I'm going to crib from you, right? Talking about his career path and saying that it's like being on a sailboat and you're tacking, right? Trying to find the wind, trying to find the path. Sometimes you get a little closer, sometimes you get a little farther, but you just assess where you're doing, where you're at, what opportunities present themselves, and just try to steer that course towards sort of the amorphous destination you're trying to get at. And so that's what I'd say.
It's a funny question. It's a good question. My original background was in finance, and I was a business student, and I studied finance, and I, for a while, like many people who live in the Twin Cities area, worked at Target as a business analyst, and wanted to. Well, I would never said I wanted to get into sustainability. That wasn't something that people said in the late '90s necessarily, but they, I wanted to get into something. Mostly, I said that I wanted to get into environmental conservation was something that I was thinking about. I'm not going to tell you my whole story. I'll tell you that it was like taking a sailboat, and it was like jumping from one cliff to another, and it was like falling down a lot and doing a lot of weird things to kind of fit a career path together, right? And once it got some momentum going, then it was fine. But to Beth's point, a lot of these things, when we came into the field, a lot of the things that are common now didn't exist. The idea that I was coming into environmental work from a business background made me almost an enemy, whereas now it's seen as a brilliant, wonderful thing to do, right? If you have an MBA and you're working on sustainability, well, you couldn't be better paid. That was certainly not the case when I was coming in, and I was seen a little bit as an interloper from an outside kind of bad side. What I think is the really important thing to do, in addition to all that's been said already, is, and it relates to what Mary said before, I think, about the kind of overarching message of systems thinking. You have to be able, whatever your field, whatever your background, and whatever your interests, you have to be able to see how what you care about and what you do connects to other things, and you have to be able to convince people that those connections are important and places for leverage, right? And so if you can tell people how being a business major is going to help understand how people make livelihood decisions in small economies in northern Minnesota, which is the argument that I made, when I'm studying their natural resource harvesting patterns, then somebody might say, that's interesting. And then you have a place to step forward, and you have to keep doing that and keep making those connections and keep telling that story to yourself and others so that they can see the world the way that you see it. And that new way that you see the world is going to help people see the world differently. And gradually you'll make your way forward, and you'll fall into some career, and you'll be there. But it's hard, and it's constant work, but it's good work, and it's actually the work that we do.
I would just add to that is to be kind to yourself when you're just graduated. Having worked at UMD for 12 years, I've seen students graduate, and what they say 1 year out sometimes is, I got this great job, but it's not making a difference. And sometimes sitting down with them and explaining those connections is really important. And then the next year they'll email again and be like, guess what? Now I'm doing this within my company or my organization, and I feel like now I'm more connected. And then the next year you get an email update, and it's, I got a new job, and it's this. And it's just be patient and be kind to yourself. You're not going to do it in 1 year. I mean, 1 year out of graduate school, my first job out of graduate school, it was like, make buttons for this watershed festival for $10 an hour. And it was like, how does this connect to what I want to do? I want to save the world. And I had to just dig in, meet people, make connections, work hard, make the buttons, go to Watershed Festival, meet people, and dig into my community, understand things. And then pretty soon people are coming to you saying, hey, there's a job open, you should apply. And sometimes I think we want that right away, and just be patient and kind to yourself and know it's coming, keep at it.
Great. Another popular question is about informal education and using the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. So those are those 17 goals that we saw earlier in the presentation. And I think we heard a lot of discussion about how they're used in the classroom, but in informal education, there might be a different answer. Anyone have ideas?
I'll start. There's a brilliant student, Dave Herrera, if he's out there, shout out to Dave, who made a bulletin board of all the SDGs that you can flip up, and then like actions that each person could do to do this. And he just sat in our student center with this board of SDGs and little slips of paper you could take that would be, here's what I can do tomorrow to support these goals. And Dave's idea was genius. So if anyone wants to hire a great sustainability person, Dave Herrera is out there. But student orgs can connect their work to the SDGs. Just say it. Just, put the block with your table and do it. At UMD, our sustainability office started using those little blocks for our annual reporting to our vice chancellor to show her, hey, we're working on something that's bigger than UMD, bigger than Minnesota. It's these United Nations goals. And here's how our student activities and our student work is fitting into those. So use the block, make it visible, like Tom Beery said, and take a chance. Just go out there. Just do it.
Yeah, I don't know if I have much to add to that. I just want to say that, yeah, they are very clear. They're intended to be like really accessible. So I think anyone can use them, and they are compelling, right? The way they're framed are sort of in ways that most people would find engaging. So, yeah.
I have sort of an ironic answer. So my program, the MDP program, it's a program here at Minnesota, but it's also part of a network of programs. I think we have 30 or 35 programs internationally that offer the MDP degree at different institutions. And that network of programs is nested within the SDG Academy, which is a project of the United Nations. And so we're part of the SDG family, so to speak, as an academic and educational outreach program. The irony of that is that we really don't talk explicitly or teach explicitly about the SDGs in the program, but they're inherent to everything that we do. So I think if anything, I would just say that remembering to mention them and remembering to talk about them and to make, it's kind of like, I talk about this a lot with the competencies of sustainable development. Sometimes I forget to talk about them, and so students don't know that we're working on something. So I have to remind myself and them that, like, hey, we're not just doing this because it's interesting or tedious or whatever they think it is that day. And it's like, this is actually developing this competency. And I think the same applies for the SDGs. It's like, we're working on this thing, but hey, let's connect it. Just take 10 seconds, let's connect it to one of the SDGs and remember how this fits into this bigger puzzle. And that's both formal and informal, and maybe not even a full answer to the question, but I think it's a good reminder just to kind of keep those perched in your mind somewhere.
And in the back of the room here today, we have a slide deck of the Sustainable Development Goal cards, and we'll provide a link online for how to get some of those for your classroom or site. My colleague Mary, that you heard from earlier, Mary Hahnemann, uses them in a gallery walk type of exercise. So you could think about news articles or even history or perhaps papers or research papers that students are writing, and you could invite participants to categorize them themselves in an exercise and according to these different goals, and then present to each other why that work connects to the SDGs. And then you could ask yourself the question, which ones are getting work done on them and which ones aren't? And how does that provide insight about what our community or our class or our site is doing or not doing? And if you want to talk with her at the break, if you're here in the room, she could tell you more about how to do that. We have a little bit of time left, and I know there are more questions, including one about climate change in the Midwest, and I think we could post some resources on that. But I want to give the panelists a chance to share something as we start to wrap up that they would like those of you here today and online to be thinking about with their colleagues and pushing forward as we think about where sustainability education should be going next. Yeah, what do you want? What kind of conversations do you want people to be having?
I think one of the things we do in my class is we do these things called hosted conversations, where we take a topic and the students have to put together some sort of public event where they talk about and draw perspectives based on this kind of ways of knowing concept around a particular idea. And I think it's a classroom example of what I think everyone should be intentionally doing in their own work, which is actively seeking out different perspectives and ideas and opinions about the thing that they're interested in, and making some sort of deliberate attempt to make space for that in the conversations that you're having with others and with yourself. I mean, that sounds silly, but that experience is so interesting and insightful, and it will change you almost immediately in surprising and unexpected ways. And I think to continue to be disciplined in that area, to continue to seek out those opportunities for yourself, will keep you forever interested and engaged in the work that you're trying to do.
One thing that I did when I started in sustainability was this really silly exercise, which was back when people used to make phone calls 12 years ago. I would do this exercise where I'd give everyone a slip of paper and it says, you're the chancellor, you're a student that cares about X issue, and you're a professor, and you are a custodial worker, and you are a alumni, and you gave people different roles, explained their backgrounds and their intent. And then we would do this activity where you would call. It'd be like, bring-a-ling-a-ling, and you'd say, hi, this is the chancellor, and whoever your role was, you had to advocate for a position. Some of them were for solar energy, or organics recycling at UMD, which 12 years ago, people were like, we're never going to do that. Well, guess what? UMD was the first one to have campus-wide organics recycling within the U system in every building. So proud of that. But the exercise was about making phone calls, talking to people, and understanding where they come from. And I think there's so many examples of that. I know Beth uses climate simulations in her teaching to get people to see other people's perspective. Sometimes things aren't win-win. Sometimes somebody wins, somebody loses a little bit, and then somebody wins a little bit, but not as much as they wanted to win. And to understand that and to help people relate to each other and understand each other and develop empathy for each other. I'd like to see that integrated into sustainability education. It's not just about the natural systems or the technology solutions. It's about working together and finding the best thing. I say it in my work, and I say, I'm working so hard to get to the how, getting everyone on the same page so they know why we need to do something, do it, so then we can get to the how. And if you don't get that why and get that buy-in, getting to the how is really hard. So I think it's probably changed now. We could probably do like a Twitter thing or something else, but I remember those phone call conversations I do in meetings, and that it would change students and their tactics of how they would work on change.
No, they're on TikTok and Insta now, I think.
I think my answer would be just to add on to what Mindy and Dave said. So I do think that one of the key things we need to do is to think more about the broad perspectives, right? So if you think about sustainability as a wellness and flourishing issue, it's going to be something that's going to be different for different people, right? We all have different values, different cultural perspectives, and that affects how we think about flourishing and wellness. And so we need to really attend to who's not currently participating in conversations and thinking about how we include folks who aren't being included and how to amplify their voices so that we can all have, right, sort of a fair shake at working out communally, how do we address some of these problems, right? In the end, it affects all of our welfare and all of our well-being. And so we should all be working to make sure that everybody's sort of conceptions of those things are being weighed.
I think that is a great note to end the panel on, and I will hand things over to Pete again.
Thank you, Beth, and our panelists. We'll go to our final section about what's next in sustainability education, which is very nicely prompted by our panelists. And this one will be followed by a couple polls and some closing remarks. And again, we thank you for coming today. We'll have closing remarks, but as you know, these resources will share out to you, and you'll get a feedback form soon if you want to help us know how to do this better next year. And we thank you for coming. And so now we will go to this one. Thanks.
It seems to me that one thing that's missing is the full range of perspectives. So it strikes me that often sustainability is thought through a pretty narrow lens. Particularly, it's a lens of, right, when you're thinking globally, it's a Western lens, and it's a Western lens for people who are fairly wealthy. Right? So when we're thinking about sustainability, we tend to be thinking about the concerns that folks like you and I share. I think if you're thinking about sustainability from too narrow of a perspective when it comes to, right, the objectives of sustainability or the outcomes we're aiming for, or like the values that sustainability is supposed to like satisfy, you're going to like not recognize sustainability as it's manifested in other communities, right? Communities that you don't belong to. And I think in the conversations we have about sustainability in like Anglo-American like universities, we have a very narrow one that fails to recognize sustainability in other communities, right? We think about it too narrowly. We miss things.
I want to talk a bit about the issues around equity and environmental justice that from the beginning of work on sustainable development were not centered in a way that invites people from communities that are often the most impacted or the first and hardest hit by the effects of climate change. The frames of sustainable development don't necessarily feel inviting or like an exciting way to address issues that people face in their day-to-day lives or as they look at what their community needs are. Sustainability is really a way to address the problems of kind of unfettered capitalism and endless growth kind of capitalism that's driven by Western countries that really have a strong imprimatur on the way that the United Nations works in the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and in other UN bodies. So I think at the core of the idea of sustainability, which really comes from sustainable development, is this centering of the social system and structures that created the Industrial Revolution, so-called revolution, and the really oppressive legacies associated with that. And I think more honesty at the center and different ways of looking at expertise, beginning to value indigenous systems in respectful ways that aren't an afterthought, that really look at radical reconsideration of resources and land is called for.
Hello, everybody. On the issue of equity and sustainability, I'd like to first address Indigenous sustainability. And one of the things that we can do that is to honor that we're on Native land. This resource is a very helpful one in doing so. It's put out by the United States Department of Arts and Culture, and it's filled with a bunch of resources that you can use as a starting point to acknowledge that all the lands that we stand on is Native land. And Indigenous practices from all over the world have been protectors of biodiversity. And there's much to learn about Indigenous peoples and Indigenous cultures. And in fact, our own Indigenous ancestry from all over the world. One great example about Indigenous sustainability practices is Braiding Sweetgrass's author, Robin Wall Kimmerer. And she does a great job of weaving together Indigenous knowledge and sustainable efforts. And finally, another resource about bringing Indigenous studies and a new field like computer science education together is Ancestral Knowledge Meets Computer Science Education, Environmental Change and Community. And this book works with youth, and it tells us research findings from 3 years of practice on how youth bridge together ancestral knowledge systems, the revitalization of these Indigenous knowledges, and computer science education to create a greater sustainable movement in environmental change.
I think one of the things that can be missing from sustainability projects is the interdisciplinary nature that you need to have. Having operational folks work with faculty, working with students and staff at campus can really make for a great project. The ability to get out of your silo for a little minute and see what other people's goals are and understand what they're trying to get at can really help a project. One example is we wanted to figure out a tool to better communicate all the great work facilities has done, that our auxiliaries and our dining services has done, that our students have done. And how do you put that in a way that is visual? And so we developed a virtual tour at UMD in working with the Geospatial Center on campus here at UMD. And that was really fun because we had sort of the tech computer folks working with students and then taking the stories from facilities, dining, housing, student groups and putting them all together into one big virtual tour, which you can take online. And it's fun to get people out of their silo and get them charged up and just motivate them. Once people are inspired to work on sustainability, in my view, they don't really stop. They just keep going. So I would say what's next is just that we have to have more people with the courage to try. And this work can get messy and it can get really complex and you can have setbacks and failures. But sometimes you just need to keep going. The song I think about is you need to sort of be like Miley Cyrus and at times just come in like a wrecking ball and see what shakes out. It's okay to make a mess once in a while and get people working together and talking about shared values, moving your campus into the future, and along the way providing really great lessons, learning, and experiences for your students that they'll never forget.
Though I'm not a research expert on sustainability, from what I've observed, I think part of the challenge of teaching sustainability effectively and equitably is getting students to deeply engage and consider these complex issues from a multitude of perspectives. For example, I follow a number of agricultural-related Facebook groups for my work. From what I've observed, just like everywhere else in the country, though there is a significant percentage of the rural population, so farmers and ranchers, in these groups that believe and are concerned about sustainability-related issues, there's also a decent amount that have their doubts. Further, I frequently see concerns expressed over government regulations and a recoil related to perceptions of elitism directed towards people who may not work in ag directly or often even those who do but have opposing viewpoints. So how do we get, say, a student who has grown up in urban areas that may not have a lot of knowledge of agriculture nor experience with those who work in these fields to understand, for example, that sure, some farmers are implementing the use of cover crops, but others may not, and they have their reasons as to why. Ultimately, it seems to me that trying to find solutions is about getting students to wrestle with this complexity by identifying these stakeholders, as well as surfacing and relating to their needs and concerns. Then maybe finding some kind of way to reach out for constructive dialogue to hopefully help bridge divides. I believe the student-produced media assignment can be leveraged to get students out into the community to discuss sustainability topics with people who in some way intersect with these issues on a daily basis. They then can use the media to sort and communicate both their own perspectives on the topics as well as those of others on these issues, even if they may disagree. As a result, perhaps, they may be inspired to develop some solutions through compromise and understanding. This idea may sound a bit naive, but given our fractured discourse and the enormity of sustainability-related issues, I do not see any other way. Ultimately, I think this approach benefits everyone. I know I've certainly learned a great deal on the complexity and nuance of sustainability-related issues by being part of so many different projects over the years through this approach.
So what do we need to be thinking about in terms of sustainability education in the future? I think for me, it's a design challenge. The way I think about it is as if it was a design challenge. Sustainability challenges are complex challenges. They require the development and use of competencies and skills and knowledge, specialized knowledge, that can be framed in the classroom, right? That can be framed in the way that we're typically used to doing education, but that need to be activated through experience, through both structured and unstructured and predictable and unpredictable experiences. And I think the question that we need to answer and the design challenge we have to address is how to create more and better spaces that suit the types of learning experiences that are necessary for addressing sustainability challenges. More and better learning experiences that allow unpredictability, unplanned outcomes, community engagement, non-standard class times, but that still exist within kind of the university structure, for-credit coursework and things of that nature, rather than co-curricular learning abroad or summer abroad learning experiences, which are fantastic and complementary to the university experience, but that are really relegated to kind of marginal spaces in the overall university learning experience.
We really do want you to share your resources with us. So I'm serious. Please answer that Slido.com poll question about sustainability education resources. That would be great for teaching. Just to recap a few things that I heard today as themes. First, I think anyone who's listening today, you can learn whose land you're on. You can educate yourself about Indigenous presence and history. And equally important to reading books is you can find ways to meet people and go to events and sit and absorb and learn yourself. Make relationships with the Indigenous people who are in your place as you think about sustainability and indigeneity. Anyone can be part of sustainability. We really think about that here with our sustainability studies minor. It's any department, any major. We have 55 different majors involved in studying sustainability. So it's not about any one discipline. And it's not even about being a student in higher education. I think we've heard that today. Whether you're a lifelong learner, whether college isn't for you, you also can think and learn about sustainability and contribute. The challenge, the problem belongs to all of us. And it can be brought into our lives in our careers as well as in our families and our vocations, our volunteer work. We can all do that. We can all be part of a cycle of, I think Mindy really captured this well, of how we plan and then take action, maybe take a little break, and then we plan again and we take more action. And we just have to get going. This is real world kind of work. Centering flourishing and wellness is so important. We need to care for ourselves to be able to care for others and do this really challenging work where we try to teach the most complex thing I've encountered in my life, which is systems thinking. If we're going to try to teach something so hard, we have to be well rested and prepared to do that. we have to be willing to seek out emergent new ideas. So I think for me, connecting to the ideas around ecosystem health, and you heard the passion that Dominic Travis brings to that animals, plants, and people together, and how their health intersects is a really important aspect of sustainability, and there's actually even jobs in that. So staying open to new ideas, to new ways of conceptualizing sustainability is so important. Thinking about the why before the how, that's something I really came away with from today, so across many of the speakers. Getting to those sort of root causes, I think if you're going to think about doing development practice and working in sustainable development, you have to think about how people's behavior changes, how societies change. You really have to ask deep questions. You have to get comfortable with that why. And I think that applies broadly to issues around sustainability. So I think this was really beautifully captured by Clement, and also by Mindy, but this idea of empathy and considering other people's perspectives. It's not about party, it's not about any one racial or ethnic group or socioeconomic group. Like, we all are affected by sustainability. We all have ways that we could contribute and build towards a world that's better. And we really need to practice and think and really center empathy as we do that. And that will be how we can all flourish together. I think a takeaway, across anyone who's really working in sustainability is get started, make the call, take the risk, be bold, just start doing the project. And you might really, I think, as the educators were talking about running this summit, we talked about wanting to center failure. I'm not sure we did that as much as we could have. So maybe we failed to center failure. And we'll just have to get that right next time. But that's okay, because it's getting started. It's the process. It's the relationship that matters. So, next year when we have the Sustainability Education Summit, I think we're going to do such a better job of actually centering failure. But it's a learning experience. And I want to wrap by really making some important thank yous, and I hope you'll join me in the thank yous to. We have someone that we hired as a graduate research assistant to work with faculty who turned out to be, I think, deserving of an Emmy Award for filmmaking, and that is Peter Levin. He's a graduate research assistant. And that the photography and the sound is all either him or his friends, and all the photography is his. He's involved in a PhD program for environmental education, but I think if he wanted to switch to film, in my view, that would be great. And then I think it's okay to say that we have a tech wizard in the room with us. That is Dustin Carlson. There are articles written about running events like this across 5 campuses on live streaming, in person, and online with interactive features. There are articles about how this is the direction that the UN and other national bodies should take, but are still trying to figure out. But Dustin has actually figured it out, and we have done this across 5 campuses in the state of Minnesota. So thank you to him. And then really the heart of all of this, this whole project of having a Sustainability Education Summit was not an idea of staff at the Institute on the Environment. You might be surprised to learn. It was actually an idea of our educators, our affiliates. So 3 years ago, one of the educators who was from University of Minnesota Duluth said, you know what? We're tired of driving to Twin Cities all the time. And those of us in the Twin Cities, actually, we're happier kind of to drive to Duluth because they have this really beautiful lake. But, good point. We're trying to teach sustainability. We're having people drive all over the state. How crazy is that? And Liz Hill said, you should do an online summit and in-person meetings. Both of those matter. And now in the 3rd year of doing this, we have faculty and instructors and professional staff who say, yes, I will take my time and be part of a deeply collaborative, really challenging effort that doesn't center just me and my research, but a lot of folks. So thank you to the INE educators. And finally to Anna, our student staff, Anna and Sakina, who are here in the room, and our other student, and Fatima, who's in the back of the room who have all been hosting us today, and other student staff who are not with us but helped to make this happen, and to Mary Hahnemann, who pulled all of our student staff together. Thank you to all of you. And finally to Pete, do we have other things we need to close out with? We will be having another summit, so stay tuned. If you did not register, please do register at the back of the room, because I promised to some people on Slido that we would share everything, but we can't share it with you if we do not have your email. So that's my final ask. Thank you very much.